Hello, I'm Jane Vowles.
I'm Pami Nettison.
I am Sheila Ojeda.
I'm Kirsten Patterson.
I am Kamala Rampersad de Silva.
This is Kali Chui. As CEO of this institute, I am pleased to be collaborating with other female leaders
who are working incredibly hard to improve governance practices in their regions.
It is noteworthy that even as the challenges of COVID-19 are impacting our governance practices,
in many boardrooms, women's voices are absent,
silent,
or go unheard.
Yet, it is clear that the economic impact of COVID-19 is devastating.
Not only in terms of the estimated $90 trillion lost globally,
but as we see happening in some countries,
emotions are running high with respect to dealing with very fundamental decisions
like economic recovery,
reopening borders,
vaccinations,
and freedom of choice.
We cannot afford to lose out on the contribution women can make
to solve some of these problems.
We welcome you
as you join us in this 3-part series
on women in governance to bring positive change.
Positive change.
Positive change.
A change where we embrace all our voices
so that we can all contribute effectively to making governance worldwide more effective,
inclusive,
and diverse.
In other words, let's stop competing
and begin collaborating.
Let's help solve many of these problems.
As Jane said, I'm Chief Executive of ACCA, global body for professional accountants, and we bring together 233,000 members and 536,000 future members across those 178 countries. And our vision is to develop the accountancy profession the world needs, providing finance and business professionals and leaders who are respected and recognised everywhere for their dedication to our values of integrity, inclusion, and innovation. And we work for the public good, leading the global accountancy profession by creating opportunity. And for your discussions today, I really felt that that value around inclusion and the whole purpose we have as an organisation to create opportunity were particularly important. So it's a real pleasure to join you today to discuss that theme, women in boardrooms, why we need more women in boardrooms, and how do we create the change to make it happen. I want to start by sharing an interesting list from Wikipedia. You can find interesting things on Wikipedia, and it features a rolling update of the world's top 182 businesses. Among the facts it sets down are the names of their chief executives, and this is the bit that gives us a clue about why our theme today remains so relevant. The fact is, you have to look very closely to find the names of women on the list. There are 10 of them, 10 women and 172 men. In fact, there are the same number of men named James on the list than there are women named anything. If we pull the camera back a little further and take a wider view, the picture doesn't get much prettier for women at the top levels of business. Of the Forbes 500 list of the world's biggest companies, only 41 have CEOs who are women. That's 8%. And that only makes sense if you believe that men are 12.5 times smarter than women, 12.5 times more talented than women, or work 12.5 times harder than women. And as you would expect, the picture is pretty patchy all around the world. In a study of leading economists by the Catalyst Group, which advises businesses on advancing the inclusion of women in the workplace, France has the highest ratio of female directors. 44 of board members are women. And that's partly because France has had a legal quota for women on board since 2010. At the other end of the scale, Japan reported just 8% of women directors. Interestingly, the study also showed an increase in women's reputation in every country, if only small. So small, but an increase nonetheless. So there is something telling us that we're on the right trajectory. But it is clear that women are underrepresented at the top of businesses. And I want to spend some time today talking about where we are on this issue, why it needs to change, and how we can play our part in making that change happen. For me, it begins with the truth that change is already happening, too slowly, but there is perceptible change nonetheless. There are lots of factors which are accelerating the slight increase in the number of women in the boardroom, and I'll mention a few of them. The biggest one is something that's difficult to pin down and hard to measure, but it can be classed as cultural change. Put simply, it means that there is wider acceptance in societies everywhere that women should have equal access to opportunity as men in their work, including in the boardroom, if that's where their ambitions and skills take them, and in their life. Old attitudes from the ages past which discriminate against women are increasingly viewed as outmoded, outdated, and just plain wrong. That has happened in our lifetimes, and it's a generational shift. The best businesses know this. They know that to ignore the right of women to claim equal opportunities to men in every walk of life is to risk serious reputational damage. In that sense, the right of women to take the place which their abilities deserve is a business question as much as a moral question. Far-sighted companies are increasingly aware that to stay relevant, to stay respected, they must accurately reflect the aspirations and the attitudes of all their stakeholders, which includes their investors, their customers, and their staff. There's growing evidence in recent years that more women on boards equals better financial performance. A McKinsey report in 2018, based on results from 1,000 companies across 12 countries, showed a link between numbers of female executives and profitability. It ranks the firms according to numbers of women on their executive teams, and it concluded that the top quarter were 21% more likely to make above average profits in their market than the bottom quarter, and that the difference was consistent right across the world. In other words, the report found that having gender diversity on executive teams positively correlated with higher profitability across geographies. One of the most interesting trends emerging now is a changing mood among big institutional investors on this issue and a shift in how they make decisions. There is a growing willingness to hold businesses to account across a range of measures that extend way beyond profitability. Increasingly, they demand action on sustainability, on corporate and social responsibility, and on diversity, including, crucially for our theme today, gender equality. This is part of a wider movement in favour of corporate reporting, which gives as full a picture as possible of a business's long-term impact on society in the world. It is revolutionising how we judge success, and it is changing the way that we keep score in business. Another huge factor, as has already been mentioned in this, has been the pandemic. COVID-19 has changed the world forever. Its effects reach into every corner of life. It has raised questions about how we live our lives and how we carry on business, and that includes the issue of gender equality at all levels of the workplace. At ACCA, we commissioned a global survey into the effects of the pandemic on women especially, and it was clear it was disproportionately more damaging for women, both economically and socially. Our report in March this year, Gender Responsive Budgeting, brought a valuable female perspective to the crisis. For women, it has been a story of job losses, a surge in the burden of unpaid care, and increasing economic dependence on men. But as we emerge from the pandemic, in some ways, the employment landscape for women is changing for the better, and that includes more opportunities at the top of businesses and potentially greater access to board roles. The pandemic, of course, triggered a revolution in remote working and in more flexible working, which in time has the potential to liberate countless women to combine home lives and careers more easily than ever before. There's been an explosion in remote education and remote study, and we've worked to drive this forward. It has raised the chances for untold numbers of women to pursue a professional career, especially for those women who have traditionally been excluded from professional education by the simple fact of geography or by cultural and domestic pressures. I believe that the pandemic has also accelerated businesses' realization that boards need new skills, new attitudes, new voices to make sense of a new reality of a post-pandemic world. That includes qualities which aren't necessarily exclusive to women, but certainly don't exclude women either. Communication skills, diverse expertise in climate change and sustainable finance, health and safety, digitalization, data privacy, and important cognitive skills such as decision-making and problem-solving. The question of greater access to professional education for women is important for its own sake, but it also speaks to our theme of women in the boardroom. The numbers of women entering professional and business life is poised to explode in the coming generation, and this will lead to an irresistible surge of female leaders bound for the boardroom. Everything we know from ACCA's extensive research into Gen Z, the generation of 18 to 25-year-olds who are entering professional and business life now, tells us that they are ambitious, fearless, and hungry for change, regardless of gender. I've seen this with my own eyes in the accountancy profession. Before the pandemic halted most travel, I remember speaking at an event for young women finance professionals in Islamabad. I looked around that room, every seat filled, and sensed the ambition and the fierce determination to build a career that lived in every individual there. In a society where girls' education has traditionally lagged behind boys, they saw finance as a world where they could get on and make a life and career free from preconceptions about gender. It was deeply inspiring. And I knew in that moment that the future of finance leadership was female. I also knew that this trend for women to choose finance will swell the numbers of women on boards in the future, because the finance function is increasingly influential at the top levels of business. The status of finance has elevated in corporate life. The role of the CFO has grown more prestigious in the last couple of decades, and finance has emerged as a highly desirable role for smart leaders with vision and ambition. The main expertise of this new breed of leader is creating strategy rather than reports, in bringing a broader intelligence and insight to business, and driving good decision-making rather than offering a snapshot of performance at a particular time. CFOs are increasingly at the right hand of CEOs and are frequently stepping up into that number one job. I believe that finance leaders will continue on this upward trajectory, and that women who are flooding into the profession will increasingly step into the star roles of the corporate world. This is reflected in our experience around the world, where accountancy is increasingly popular choice for young women. A majority of our students, 59%, are women. And I have to say that the popularity of accountancy amongst women in general, and of ACCA in particular, is no accident. It's a result of more than a century of dedication to equality of opportunity. ACCA was founded in 1904 to open up the chance of a useful and interesting career to people who'd been excluded from professional life previously, and that of course included women. We were the first professional accountancy body in the world to admit women, and our first female member was named Ethel Ayres Purdy. For us, Ethel Purdy represents far more than a footnote in a history book. Our history shapes our present and it guides our future. We remember Ethel in particular every March on International Women's Day, when we dedicate special events to her memory. That's a living legacy, and it shows that ACCA has always and will always promote the value of fairness and gender equality. That's not why it's no surprise women feel that they belong with us. And we have 24 of the 41 members are our global governing council, 59% are women. And 5 of my team, 7 strong executive team, are women. And that brings me to the first of my recommendations for how we get more women into boardrooms. As I mentioned at the start, it's about culture. It's about building a respect for gender equality, equality for all people into the DNA of business. It's about communicating these values clearly at every level of an organisation, and it's about living these values. That's the reason why my recommendations aren't about quotas or targets for numbers of women on boards. There's nothing wrong with those quotas, but quotas, if they can be granted, can also be removed. For a stronger and far more durable solution is my belief that every business benefits from more women's voices in the boardroom. After all, you can read as many reports about the benefits of quality as you like, but there's no substitute for lived experience and in gaining that insight and knowledge when investment decisions are made and strategic courses are set. I also believe mentoring is incredibly important. The leaders of today can make a major contribution by offering guidance and support to the female leaders of tomorrow. And the more that great female leaders emerge, the broader the path will be for talented young women to follow. ACCA's theme for last International Women's Day was Imposter Syndrome. It was about that inner voice which some women hear, which tells them they aren't ready or good enough to take on a bigger leadership role. I hope you'll excuse the generalisation, but men are still more likely to take a chance on applying for a promotion. More women are far more likely to focus on what they can't do rather than what they can do, and are less likely to take a leap of faith and apply. Our message is all about encouraging women that they should silence that voice that tells them they can't and listen to the voice that says you can. Mentors can play such an important role in amplifying the positive and drowning out the negative. One of the most important lessons a female leader can learn is that a career isn't something that happens to you, it's something you can make for yourself. One of the biggest challenges facing us to bridge the final step that separates senior women in non-board position from a director's role, even in countries where women are incredibly well educated and equipped with first-class degrees, double masters and PhDs, they get so far up the corporate ladder only to find the final rung missing. For me, the key to making that last move comes back to culture again. Businesses must come to understand that there is a clear business case why appointing more women to the board isn't a nice to have. It isn't a shiny statistic to adorn a glossy annual report or a crowd-pleasing PR stunt. It's a business essential, a necessity for any organisation that wants to build a sustainable future and reflect its customers, shareholders, and employees' lives and aspiration. I think it's this breakthrough in culture and in attitudes that will change women's prospects of reaching the boardroom. I believe that the landscape will surely change at last for the coming generation. And it will change because businesses simply cannot afford to ignore the talents of half the world's population if they want to survive. Yes, quota for women on boards can be useful. They can shine a spotlight on the urgent need for more women in senior roles. But this isn't all a numbers game. Even the most stringent target, robustly monitored and zealously enforced target, is not as powerful as the mightiest force there is, the unstoppable power of an idea whose time has come. Thank you all so much, and I hope you enjoy the sessions ahead.
Helen, thank you. Thank you very much for that very inspiring introduction and speech there. I loved this idea of an irresistible surge of women, and that finance will lead the way. But I think, you know, we're seeing in many parts of the world that those hopeful messages are still feel like a long way away. I haven't seen any questions yet on the Q&A, but I'm sure there will be some. But maybe just one from me, and that is this whole question of culture. How do we get that message into the boardroom, I guess, because that's surely where the message needs to be heard. And I think that a lot of businesses are still focusing on, you know, what they see as the business matters, and they don't see the relevance of diversity, sadly. Do you have any insight?
Yeah. Well, of course, we all know culture is a many-faceted thing, and I always wish there was a switch I could flick to get the right culture, but we know it takes a lot of time, a lot of work. I do think that the broader demands for society on business and government at the moment are a big opportunity to be bringing this message into the boardroom. And interestingly, investors will be one of the ways that that happens. We're seeing more and more the acute awareness of investors of that broader sense of performance that isn't purely financial. And they are looking at inclusion and diversity in the boardroom as one of the indicators of the health of a business and the likely future success of the business. I'm involved, as was mentioned, in the integrated reporting movement, and looking at that holistic use of capital. So, of course, sustainability in the climate change sense and broader sustainability is also part of that changing reporting landscape. But the social impact of a business is extremely important to investors now, and that gender diversity piece is important. So I think having that discussion around the boardroom table is becoming increasingly important. And one of the frameworks I would suggest that can be used for that discussion and actually helps to drive business performance in that broader way are the UN SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I think, again, we're seeing more and more companies, declaring commitments to those goals, but B, having to demonstrate progress against them, so to measure their progress. So again, I think transparency, an understanding of how a business is going to move towards contributing to the achievement of those goals will be another avenue by which the value of women will be absolutely appreciated. But we have to make sure that conversation is taking place.
Thank you, Helen. There's a question here from Penelope saying, how do you fast track change? Because we heard from Sheila 135 years, I think the World Economic Forum even said 200 years. So, my daughter, her children may not see that change. How do you fast track change if you don't do quotas? I think that's Penelope's question.
Yeah, well, I do think, as I said, I don't think quotas are necessarily a bad thing. I just think it's as a sustainable long-term tool, that's not enough in and of itself. So I think it's all about looking at the circumstances you're in, either as a business or as a country or as a region, and say, is that going to make a significant shift? And in many cases it will, but it needs to be underpinned by that cultural shift also, because political whims change, rules can be changed, but actually it's much harder, as we know, because we're trying to shift the culture in the positive way. If we can shift the culture in the positive way, it'll be harder to undo that. So I think we have seen example, and what I felt was interesting in the UK example was that there wasn't a mandatory quota, but there was a declared intent, and that then comes around to reputational damage or enhancement, doesn't it? And there was no business in the UK that wanted to be held up as the one organisation or business that hadn't moved towards the target that had been declared by the government, although it wasn't a mandatory target. So there are different ways of tackling this, but having a clear idea of what good looks like and saying that's what we're going to go for, and then being measured against it and being transparent about it, works in all of those contexts.
Thank you. There's a question here from Karen saying finance will lead the way, but do you automatically need finance to get a seat at the board? Is it an absolute prerequisite, or are there other qualities?
No, I mean it's not an absolute prerequisite in terms of being professionally qualified. Absolutely not. And the many fantastic female leaders on boards who come from different executive routes. The one thing I would say, we did do a piece of research, it's a little bit old now, like about 6 years ago, which showed that of the women who did get onto boards, a far higher proportion of them had a finance qualification than the men. So the men were not being held to the same professional requirements as the women in order to get onto the board. So we did see that women on boards had there were a high number of them with finance qualifications. I certainly think that there's something of a false divide in the roles for women in executive teams and the roles for men in executive teams. And that's where we have to get that breadth and depth established. And I did mention executives a lot in my introduction, because I think unless we do tackle that, there isn't going to be the pipeline that does come onto the board. But essentially, yes, what that research showed was a high percentage of women had finance qualifications, and it was required more of them than it was required of men. So it was almost as if they were having to prove their seriousness.
Yeah, absolutely. Helen, one more question, I think, because we'll keep the other questions also for the panel discussions, I'm sure. But Joy Marie is saying, how do we really get over this patriarchy bias? Which is, you've almost mentioned it there as well, this idea that women have to be more qualified than men in a way to get into the boardroom. But the patriarchy bias, which requires deliberate intentions by the board. In your experience, any suggestions on overcoming this and the arguments to go with it?
Well, certainly there are lots of business, as I said, lots of evidence, which I think we all have to absorb and be able to talk about in terms of performance of a business being better with female board members and executive leaders. So, all of that. But I do think there's a long way to go in there being an acceptance of what a good leader looks like, that it's not one stereotypical, as you said, patriarchal role. And I think I'd say myself and women are as guilty of this as anyone else, that that's kind of assertive, very assertive, macho way of leading is understood to be how leadership happens. Now, we know that that is absolutely being blown out of the water at the moment. Generation Z, as I was talking about earlier, think it's laughable. I think they just don't get it at all. But we have to start modelling that more and more. The fantastic women that are on this call and the men who are here supporting, all those women and men here are really great role models that we have to get in front of people more to understand that leadership comes in many forms, and it can be very inclusive, it can be very different, and that's not, there isn't one way of being a female leader either, but we have to accept, if we're going to accept diversity, we have to accept and model diversity in leadership roles.
Helen, thank you very much. I'm going to stop there because we've got a panel of speakers. I hope you can stay with us for the panel, but we understand if you've got a dash, I know. But I'm going to hand over to Palmy now. But Helen, I think you'll see all the comments. Thank you for your brilliant thoughts. I think you've been very inspirational for a lot of people as well, not just on today's webinar, but in general. And thank you very much for joining us today and for getting us off to a great start and a very reflective but optimistic view, I think, that you've given us today, which is great. So, Palmy, I'm going to hand over to you now to introduce the panel. And there's lots of questions I can see queuing up, so I'll try and help you with those.
Thanks, Jane, and hello everybody from sunny Johannesburg, South Africa. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderator for our panel, a dear friend, colleague and mentor, Faye Mukadam. Along with being a chartered director SA and an advocate of the High Court in South Africa, Faye brings extensive leadership experience in various executive and non-executive roles and positions that she's occupied over the years. Faye was recognized as being the most influential businesswoman in the financial sector in South Africa in both 2016 and 2017, and has also been recognized through various other awards nationally and internationally. Through her thought leadership with the IODSA as technical advisor and subject matter expert, she has advised and assessed boards in the private and public sectors on key business and governance issues through their respective different business phases, and also acts as a mentor to individual directors. Faye is also a guest lecturer at major universities and business schools in South Africa, and has delivered papers at national and international conferences on governance, leadership, and development economics. She's a skilled public speaker, panelist, sought after opinionista on matters pertaining to leadership, governance, and the role of directors in the time of disruption. With that, I'll hand over to you, Faye.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Pami. And I'll just echo your earlier sentiments. Hello to everybody, wherever you are in the world. I'm really thrilled to be here. And I'm actually in a different part of South Africa, but also quite sunny today. So very lovely. Just to get into it, we are honored and privileged to have a very esteemed panel in the next session. And I can count one of the individuals there too as a friend, a dear friend and a colleague, spanning a period of well over a decade. More importantly for me, though, in addition to being an esteemed and seasoned panel, is that every single member on the panel has practical experience on the ground. And I think the value in that practical experience will come through in some of the discussions that we have. So just to introduce our panel this morning, I'm going to start off with Jean-Pierre Dallet. Jean-Pierre, correct me if I am getting any of the pronunciations incorrect. Jean-Pierre is the Group Chief Executive of Ciel Limited. Ciel is an international Mauritian group listed on the Stock Exchange of Mauritius and on the SEM Sustainability Index. The group invests and operates in 6 strategic sectors, namely agriculture, finance, healthcare, hotels and resorts, property and textile. Founded in 1912, Ciel is today present in more than 10 emerging markets across Africa and Asia, employing 32,000 talented individuals for a consolidated audited turnover of MUR 21.92 billion. Jean-Pierre has an MBA from the International University of America in San Francisco and is also the Vice President of the Business Mauritius Council. He also holds other directorships on several companies which are also listed on the Stock Exchange of Mauritius. I'm then going to move to our second panel member, Alaa Al-Hashem. Alaa is a licensed business advisor and full-time board member based out of Riyadh. He's a director in a variety of boards and committees of companies that are either publicly listed, government-owned, or family offices covering multiple industries. Alaa has worked in corporate and private banking and investment advisory for about 18 years, and then for the past 4 years, he has focused on directorships. He is skilled in portfolio management and optimization and keen on driving companies' performance through good governance and dynamic relationships with the executive teams. Alaa hopes to make a positive contribution in areas of special interest to him, such as diversity and inclusion, social investment, sustainability in family-owned businesses, literature, and visual arts. Alaa has a bachelor degree in accounting from King Fahd University, an MBA from Lancaster University. He's a chartered director and most notably the first Saudi national to be admitted as a fellow of the Institute of Directors in London. Our third panelist, Colleen Larson, is the president of the 30% Club of Southern and Eastern Africa. Colleen is the chief executive of Business Engage and has a career spanning 28 years within the financial services market. She's best known for her work in gender mainstreaming, having won recognition as one of the leading voices for the sustainable advancement of women in the corporate and entrepreneurial space in South Africa today, using the business case as a basis for transformation. She's the first chairperson of the South African Women Entrepreneurs Network, an initiative of the Department of Trade and Industry. And in 2013, she started the Gender Mainstreaming Awards, currently in its 9th year. Thank you, and I'm sure that you'll join me in welcoming all of these very experienced and senior individuals. I'm going to kick off, if I might, Jean-Pierre, just with some initial thoughts of yours, please.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I would say that from what I've heard today, the Helen presentation was extremely interesting. And I think what is really important is for us to set goals. If I take my example, I mean, we did approach our SDGs last year, and as far as gender balance, we did set some clear targets, which still are actually 30% at board level by 2030 and 35% at management, senior management level by 2025. And I must say that, I mean, I always inside of me had this will of introducing more women. But once you have, clear targets, it really motivates you and in fact opens up your mind, because you start working towards the target. And I must say that since I've been, working at it with a team which is doing a fantastic job, and we have a lady who is heading the Women Network Forum for the group, and this has actually percolated down to each other company of our group, which is quite large as a whole in terms of employees, because we employ in excess of 30,000 people, and we have 45% of our people who are women. So doing that has really helped us open up our mind and make us much more conscious about what needs to be done about it, and how we should really progress, and what are the different action points that we should trigger. So we set up a number of things, the programs, panel discussions, raising leadership training for women, and it had all started with I must say great enthusiasm, and I'm happy about the way things are progressing. But I realize how big and how daunting the challenge is, although this percentage may appear low to some of you, but we're still at 18% at our level as far as the board membership is concerned, and we have a number of companies, so we have a number of boards, so a lot to work on. What I would say is that as I move on, as I chair companies and being the CEO of a group, the lack of precise data is really a disadvantage, especially in a small country like ours. Mauritius, doesn't have that many professionals, although it's changing fast. And we tend to see that women are more people, or maybe in our country it's different. I mean, I heard what Helen said, it's changing, but the jobs that women take are more people-centric. And so it's more difficult to find people in finance. And right now I'm trying to find someone who can chair the audit and risk committee of quite a large, for our side, for our country, hotel company, but it's difficult to find people, who have that background. So that's a challenge. And then maybe a thought would be that we tend to focus a lot on experience. Maybe there should be more focus, on the competences to really make a change, and more focus on younger people, so that they can bring also, with the way we are marketing, our companies today, a different perspective to things. And then, okay, so I'll stop here. And
of course, there's a lot to get through.
Okay.
I think Jean-Pierre, the 2 points just to pick out from what you're saying, I think is important. The fact that there should be clear goals and targets set. But I think of particular importance, and I'd like to come back to you after we hear from Allah as well, is that it's really important that the person who sits in a position of influence and authority actually throws their considerable weight behind these initiatives, failing which we won't actually see the needle moving. So I think that's of particular importance. Allah, just to bring you in here, obviously based on your introduction and your engagement on different boards in different spaces, as well as with management teams, what's your experience been like with the introduction or absence of support for women on boards?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Faye was very generous in the introduction, and usually when you write a bio, you don't feel that it's exaggerated, but when it is recited out loud, I felt a bit embarrassed because that gave me a little bit sense of inflated maybe accomplishments. But to be very honest, when I was asked to speak, I didn't know what to say because I might not be that influential person, as Faye mentioned. But I'm trying my best. So I decided to dedicate my part today speaking about what are the practical things as us as individuals can do to help the cause. Because in webinars and seminars and conferences, there is a lot of talk, but it's very hard to take these takeaways and apply them in business. So I'll try to focus on the practical way of each of us, what can do as male and female to get in the boardroom, and after we get in the boardroom, what to do. So when you take a round again and you come back to me, I think I'll focus on.
All right. Would you just to pick up on that again, there's something that's particularly interesting for me is the lack of data that Jean-Pierre alluded to. Colleen, what's you're right there on the ground, and I think have the war wounds, which I'm familiar with, to share with us. What's your experience been in terms of whether it be absence of data and maybe some more practical experiences that some of the women who have engaged with you have shared, and maybe just a little bit about some of the companies as well that have been awarded the Gender Mainstreaming Awards, or maybe not been, fortunate enough. Just some of those issues, please. Thank you.
Fantastic, Faye. So thanks so much for having me. And I'm looking at my screen, and apologies, I see I'm back to front for my background, but that's I thought I understood exactly what to do. So apologies for that. But I think, Faye, one of the things we have to bear in mind is that this is not a story that's going to happen overnight. We're on a journey, and I think, but we're going in the right direction. So I think if we're going to think it's going to happen by tomorrow, I've coined a word called a clevolution, because we don't want it to be a revolution, because that's really not sustainable. We also don't want to wait the 135 years that it tells us we're going to take to get to parity. So it's got to be somewhere between that. But I think, we've got to understand that with boards, we need consistency, and only then will change takes place. So I think what we've done is, as a collective, is we've really driven this whole conversation around women's issues, women's problems with women, that type of thing. And yet it's the diversity that makes a business sense, and it's diversity that makes business sense to take us forward into where we want to go to. Having said that, I think where we really get stuck is we drive it from a numbers game. So we set those targets and we drive towards the targets, but we don't look after the culture. And so what happens is we get the numbers right, and at the end of the year, we're then chasing numbers again because we haven't dealt with the culture. So I think there's a lot more broader aspects around this. Business Engage has been tracking all of the JSE listed companies over the last 4 years because, we strongly believe that either legislation or regulation is what actually drives us forward. Even when we had the King Codes, when they were recommending that we rotate at least a third of the non-executive directors once a year, we saw zero rotation. So I'm not an advocate for quotas, because I believe that you get to the quota and you stop. However, pushing us in that direction and getting us on the go is something that we really need. When we started what we were doing, we were strong advocates of making sure that the chairman, CEO, and board get involved in what we're doing, because you've got to have the DNA of the organization. To really drive this. You can't drive it as a numbers game. It just doesn't make sense. But in order to move the conversation forward, we need to have a much broader conversation, not only in terms of the numbers, because I think we get stuck on the numbers and then we talk about what hasn't been achieved, what we haven't done, instead of saying, this is where we're going, this is what we're going to do, and tell the stories. That is where the Gender Mainstreaming Award started, was because everybody's doing things, but it's all been done in their little silos and no stories. So it looks like gender's this little program that nobody's doing. And when you put it all together, so much has been done. And so I think even in terms of research, we haven't coordinated all the research. There's a lot of research that's been done, but we haven't coordinated. And we haven't actually got that into a more powerful group of information that we can use. So yes, things are happening. Yes, we haven't achieved what we should have done by now. But the thing is, we can't look at what we haven't done. We have to look at where we're going to and put that in the targets go forward.
Thank you, Carl. Ala, if I can just come back to you, you said that you might not be that influential. I think you certainly are. And of course, everybody is. And you can see from your experiences, why do you think that some boards are reluctant to actually appoint women? Why, in your experience, have you found that?
Well, Faye, that was actually the title of this panel, why boards are reluctant. And I was swimming against that current, sort of speak, because I don't think the boards are the only stakeholder or party that is involved in the decision making. There is a lot of components in the ecosystem. The board usually will have a nomination committee, and that nomination committee should have a direction or general direction of who to hire based on competencies. I think Jean-Pierre will elaborate on the competency aspect, but the nomination committee is usually working within guidelines. But if they don't have this engraved in their daily thinkings that they have to be fair and they have to give equal opportunities and they have to consider the larger pool of men and women. And I think all the panelists will agree that the women pool is smaller. So you can't find many executives. That was the case in Mauritius, as Jean-Paul said, and I think all other countries. But in the GCC countries, the problem might be magnified a little. So there aren't as many. So it makes the job of the NRC more difficult to try to find women candidates. But I'll give you an example, and I will lead to the observation I have. In one of the listed companies in Saudi Arabia, and that's the only arena where women will need to apply for the job instead of being headhunted. So the listed companies, usually they announce the vacancies on the Tadawul exchange, which is the index here in Saudi Arabia, or the stock exchange name. So they will have to go to the portal. The company will go to the portal and announce that the General Assembly will happen on that day and anyone can apply. The issue with that is that they don't specify that women and men can apply. They just say anyone who thinks is entitled, is qualified, can apply. And back to that example, I think the applications were 34 or 37. That particular case was few months back, and there was only one woman applicant. So I felt that women in general, they don't feel entitled to apply. First, because the pool is small and not a lot of people have worked on the mentality and the awareness of women in their middle career. And I think to solve the leadership pool problem, we should start working on the middle management pool, and anyone who is involved and anyone who cares about this subject should take lead in coaching and mentoring this middle management women to help them grow on the ladder of leadership, and then feel that they are qualified and entitled, and also has it as a career goal to be on board. Because as I speak with a lot of them, they don't see it as a career goal. They don't know how much they are being compensated for it, and they don't even see it as a natural progression after they become leaders for their organizations. So that's step number one in my practical list of what to do.
Thank you for that, Ala. Jean-Pierre, to come back to you, You had mentioned that sometimes it's difficult, for example, to find somebody with a more technical background, and there seems to be a default where women are put into the historically safer, maybe, positions and appointments. Just based on what Ala is saying also as how women either see themselves and how they can be supported. What's your experience been? And maybe just to draw on some of the other boards that you sit on the SEM as well, is there a reluctance, or is there a grappling in terms of what Colleen said, just a focused, guided roadmap? This is where we're heading. Jean-Pierre, you're on mute.
I think that it is very important, first of all, that at board level, the chairman, because as we heard earlier, I mean, most of the chairman position are actually taken by men. I think on the one hand, it's extremely important that the space is made, for the woman to express, because there is, a difference in approach, and I think we have to be careful as chairman as we manage boards, and then the other aspect is I think that the way we run boards should actually be changed. I think that we look too much at the back mirrors. We focus too much on the financials. And as Helen said earlier, there are many other KPIs to look at, and then strategy, of course, is extremely important, but many other SDGs that we need to focus on are as important. So I think it is the responsibility of the board to change that approach and to make more space for women who can bring, I think, from that perspective, maybe, more rapid additional value. And then, of course, it's all about training. I think it's difficult to sit on a board if you don't fully grasp, the financial implications, because the way that, we are audited and the way that the finance profession is moving is still, demanding a lot of understanding of, what are the parameters behind the financial numbers, and especially so if you are in the banking industry, for instance.
Sure. Thank you. Colleen, just to bring you in here, we've touched on, and unfortunately it's such a short time period for some rich debate, but there's the issues of historic patriarchy, of historic and traditional social norms and a view, not just maybe boards and companies grappling with how to increase female participation, but like Ala says, the women themselves being reluctant or not being able to see themselves in those positions. You touched earlier on that roadmap issue, and as opposed to, maliciously in a malicious compliance manner, chasing targets, but looking at programs and starting these earlier. And I'm sure you can draw on your history when we look at gender mainstreaming, for example. If you want women to participate, how do you deal with childcare in a programmatic sense? So are we making any progress, or are we just setting up these childcare programs and not really thinking through whether if a woman really leaves early consistently, that somewhere, somehow, subconsciously she is being excluded from progression and promotion, things like that? What's your experience?
Yeah, so I think, sorry, I just need to move out of here quickly. Just give me a sec.
Not a problem. And whilst you're moving, I can tell you that my screen is the one that's upside down, I think, not yours.
Sorry, we've actually, it's Women's Month, so we've got a function happening. I've got another thing, so apologies. So look, I mean, I think that what has happened is that we've really looked at things very much in isolation rather than really a concerted, collaborative thing. So what happens is we come up with all of these recommendations, not really taking it from start to finish. So we come up with the childcare, but yet we haven't actually considered that if you look at the education of girls coming up, that is where one of the issues is, because we've got so many girls that are out of school. We haven't even spoken about that. We also looking, women have been intellectualize, keep your head down, work hard, get your matric, get your degree, get your master's, get your PhD. And then what happens is then we don't actually have the talent, as Jean-Pierre said, with the finance, because we haven't considered what are the real issues. We're just trying to plug little things, little issues as we go along. So even when we speak to boards now, they are saying that they want more rounded board members. They want board members that can come into a board and not only talk on one particular topic, but when you actually start conversations, they can actually input their advice. So that is where women actually lack confidence, because what happens is a conversation goes off on finance and perhaps they are marketing an individual and they haven't really had the necessary know-how. So I think before we start looking at putting in little bits and pieces, we should actually take a step back, look at all the issues, but look at if we actually address all of the issues, what are the things? And I think what we've also done is we've made a male-female issue. So why do we talk about mothers with babies that they have to look after? If you look at the pandemic now, we actually are finding that fathers are turning around and saying, you know what, I'd love to spend a bit of time with my kids. You know, and it's then starting to take kids to school and whatnot. So I think we need to get away from this male-female conversation and realize that we are all people. And once you start understanding that we're all people with all skills, you can actually then start building a talent pipeline with diversity that makes that business sense. You know, and as I said, until we get away from this male-female issue and how men are more this and women are more that, I don't think we'll ever reach the point where we can truly say we got that diversity happening.
Thank you for that, Colleen. That stereotypical binary view, you know, that always ends up, the default is pigeonholing us. So I'm just going to turn to some of the questions from the delegates. And the first one, and I'll take thoughts from each of you if you'd like, or any one person. The question, though, is to the whole panel. When we look at ESG conversations, which is the current focus, I feel this seems to be increasingly the environment which is driven by expectations and demands of stakeholders, consumers, investors, etc. How can we get stakeholders to appreciate the importance of diversity equally or more? And Helen alluded to this in her introductory topic, and we're certainly seeing it on the ground, is that if investors are a lot more active in making certain demands or requesting certain information when it comes to board selection, nomination, appointment, then that does carry a lot of weight. What are your thoughts in terms of this? Jean-Pierre, I'll start with you.
Sorry, I've just been disturbed. Could you roll to someone else? I'll come back to you.
Not a problem. It is also, if you'd like, the questions are in the Q&A box. Ala, would you like to take a stab at just some thoughts?
Sure. It's a big question about the ESG.
It is.
Like,
it is.
I would like to use an analogy here. Somebody speaks to his boss and says, boss, we need to talk about ESG. And that boss would tell him, who's asking? Like, who's pushing for it? And as you rightly mentioned, if the investor is not pushing for it, then there is a problem, because that boss is probably busy improving his bottom line, streamlining. So ESG is maybe at the back of his head, but it's not the priority today. And I was lucky enough to attend a 6-week conscious investor fellowship. It's called like that. And I wasn't aware why it's called conscious investor, because you will have to move from a stage of unconscious to conscious. But as an investor, probably you are not conscious today, and then you have to move to that stage. One of the governance pillars is for investors to participate in the governance setup in any organizations. And take again an example of a listed company. The small shareholders aren't participating enough in the governance and in the decision making. Probably they are attending once every 3 years the General Assembly and just listening. So if they are not moving from being unconscious investor to being conscious investor, they will not prioritize anything. The other party that I want to mention is the customer for any organization. So if I will buy your product, I want you to go by my values and ethics. ESG might be one of them. And if the customer also is unconscious of what his influence on that particular company by buying or not buying, also it requires that the whole society is aware and everyone in the society is participating. That's what's making it difficult.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ala. Just to pick up, Colleen, in addition to that question, and something you said earlier, Nigel is asking how do we get owners and leadership of organizations to appreciate that the diversity and the inclusion actually leads to profitability. And that falls squarely within this ESG basket now, which is the flavor of the month. And yet, like all good things, is as old as time itself. What are your thoughts, Cole?
Well, what I think is it's the conversations that we have been having. It's a result of investors and that not knowing about the impact that we can have by making diversity on the board. So, as I said, once again, we've made it a women's issue. I don't know of any man that sits in the morning and says, let's see how we get women down today. They're far too busy doing business. And I think that is where we need to get to. We need to get to a point is what does make business sense? Are we talking about the fact that it's men out, women in terms of a board? No, we're not, because essentially it's not about actually looking at how do we bring in more women who perhaps don't have the competence, as Jean-Pierre was speaking about. It really is about, once you've built the pipeline, once you've actually got the true steps in an initiative to, or in terms of your targets, whatever you set within a company, that actually speak to what your values are, what your culture is, what your targets are, what your bottom line is, all of those things. By the time it gets to the board, you've already sold the case. You cannot actually sell a case with just putting women in the top. It just doesn't work. And so I think the conversation is, and I did see one of the Q&A was talking about why do we only chase the listed boards. No, it's not only the listed boards, because it's not only the listed boards that actually have this conversation going, but until such time as we can really build a consistent and really thought out how we address the issues before we even get to the board, we will never see the results we're looking for. So yeah, I think it's a much bigger picture than that.
Okay, thank you. Jean-Pierre, to come back to you, not just the ESG debate, but also pulling on from some of the things that you raised earlier in terms of, like Colleen says, competency, but also a supported programmatic approach.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to pick up on what Colleen said. I think diversity is definitely a strength. I mean, we are in a country which is very much multicultural, and I think that's a huge strength which we are not exploiting enough. Many of the Mauritian companies have invested abroad, and the fact that we have these different backgrounds, I think we are in a position to interrelate with different communities very well. So it is definitely a matter of diversity. I mean, women is part of the diversity, right? Because I think the decision-making process really is best when there is a diverse opinion. Otherwise, you tend to have people, thinking in the same direction and making the same wrong decision, hopefully the right one, but very often the wrong one. So we need that diversity is very important. And then on the, we really need to embrace sustainability and the ESG. I think today is not even a debate. I mean, the customers are moving flat out in that direction. And if we don't do that, we'll be left behind if it's not already the case. So that's really a complete must. And it's not even a company's must, but it's a country's must. And when I look at our beautiful little country, always think that we can do so much better in terms of sustainability at large. We've been very affected by the hotel industry. But yes, I mean, getting the right competences, I think we need to be more daring at the level of a board and to the level of a management to take more risk, employ younger people who have a different mindset and can bring competencies which are different. And very often we tend to stick to the same kind of thinking and not allow younger people to come in, and they are, so surprising, and they can, teach us so many things,
sure.
Even at board level.
I love that, Jean-Pierre. I do think we need to, fortune does favor the brave, and probably now's the time for bold, hairy and audacious goals and objectives, as you've said. Alas, some of the questions that are coming up talk about whether or not can men be doing some more? Should we put or increase the number of women on nomination committees, because then maybe women will be supported a lot more? Perhaps women are not seeing themselves as being on the boards because family comes first. So still very much this binary view that Carl also talked about. What's your experience been in terms of women? Is it that they're not being selected, or they're insufficient number of them are actually applying?
See, there is a difference between organic and inorganic way of doing things and filling gaps. And what I understand from the talk today, last week, and all the other webinars I attended is that there is always an urge of filling the gap or closing the gap or doing something inorganically to fix a problem. And I'm not a big fan of this, as I see things should progress naturally. As mentioned earlier, we are all agreeing on that limited pool of talents that are available in certain progression of women career, which is leadership. And I don't have the stats today, so I cannot tell you there are as many women in executive leadership, but the observer will just know it, that there are limited number of women anyways. So if we try to force things, just like the legal quota system, things will get ugly because people will not feel comfortable. I think there are 4 things that as individuals we can do, and I listed them here. One of them is, as mentioned earlier, career coaching and mentoring, which is very important, and it should be done on a grassroots level. I think all these 6 institutes that you guys belong to, GCC, BDI being one of them, is working on mentorship program. So there is an official mentorship program, but we also work outside these borders, and we try to mentor as many women as possible and give them the sense of entitlement, and we tell them where to get the qualification to be on board, and also highlight that this is a good career option for you if you want to grow up the ladder. The second thing is, as you mentioned, forcing it through NRCs. The nomination committees would usually have a good say about it, but there should be a groundwork behind it. So not a lot of company can find women and men equally, qualified men and women, to put them on board. I personally head one nomination committee, and there are certain people who should help. Headhunting companies, your personal network, a friend who already worked on a project like this before and have access to name, GCC, BDI can, and all, I think the institute can advertise for you if you want. But the tricky part is to be bold enough to say this position is open to women and men. So you give them the encouragement to apply, and also make a point for the rest of the board members is that I am giving a priority to women because this board doesn't have a woman. And you will have to tell them why diversity is good. And please don't go back to the research that's being done, because all the conferences talk about this research. Like, if you introduce women to the board, you get better. There is evidence for improved performance. And I don't see anyone listening in the company level for these statistics and research results, because they see what is available for them. And they also have to make board evaluation first to understand what is their baseline and what is the improvement they are getting with men, So when they introduce women, they will know the difference. So they don't want to hear the statistic of someone else or the research of someone else. They want to see it practically for them. The third thing we already covered, which is to act as an investor, as a conscious investor, to make a point when you join a general assembly or you are a venture capital company or a private equity company, is that a criteria for investing should be diversity. And I would say diversity in general. I wouldn't specify gender diversity or anything, because diversity as a quality on its own is the one we are seeking. And it will produce the improved performance that we are hoping for, and also will reduce the sensitivity to the topic. So we ask for diversity, we don't say gender diversity. And the last thing, you can act in a good way to change the policies of the country. I think the legislation in any country will play a great role, but you can change it or influence it in two ways. You can either be the policymaker, work for the Capital Market Authority, work for the court, for the Royal Court, work for the Dawal, one of these agencies that influence things on the legislation side. But you also can be an advocate for it. So you can lobby for it, you can speak with those who make decisions, you can be an organization that specializes in advocacy, you can be the Institute of Directors in certain country and advocate for. So there are 4 things mainly to do, and I've just summarized them now.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move towards the closing part of the panel, and maybe as part of your closing remarks from each of the 3 of you, I'm going to pick up on Gemma's question, which is that just from within the governance space, and where women might in the governance space be feeling a lot more heightened sense of imposter syndrome, an intimidating governance culture, being faced on a daily basis by the patriarchal systems. Do you think that we need to consider a governance, a paradigm shift in this space, and revisiting the culture and the processes within organizations to look at attracting additional women? And you know, there's a cartoon that I'm sure some people have seen. It's usually applied to race, certainly in South Africa, but also to gender, where whilst you're allowed to start equally, if historically you have been prejudiced for whatever the reason, then your path ahead might be strewn with obstacles. So the race is not completely equitable, and we're not maybe together on a parity. So maybe that's what Gemma's alluding to. Do we need to do anything? And if I can then just have your closing sentiments as well. Col, I'm going to start first with you, please. Thank you.
Look, I mean, I think, yes, I get you. I get you that there's imposter syndrome. I get all of that. And I mean, we've spoken about the issues forever and a day. But I think where we really have to get to is the point where we know the past, we know what has happened, we know all of these issues. I think especially the women who have actually experienced things like imposter syndrome and that type of thing as they've gone forward and they've overcome these things, I think it's bigger onus on them to actually come back and train up the people that are coming on behind. But until such time as, you know, there are various other aspects, and as I said, you know, there's things like, for instance, there are women available. When we speak to corporates and they say, oh, where are these women? We just don't know where they are. The problem is that women, because of the journey they've been on, they don't shout about their achievements. They don't talk about who they are and what they've achieved. So by the time they get to their board structure, nobody really knows how powerful they are. And then they step into that board environment and they're such powerful women and mothers and everything like that. And they step into that board environment and their mouth is closed. Because now they're scared. For some reason, that board's got and senior leadership has got like a thing on. And I think what we need to do is take a step back, make women understand how really powerful they are, make them understand that unless they're there, that one cog of the diversity is not actually being addressed. And that is where we need to get to. Not about going to boards and knocking on them and saying what you haven't done, who you haven't, because I'll turn around and say, you know what, we've got more than enough on our plate, go and talk to somebody else. So what we have to do is we have to take a step back, put in place our journey of what we want to achieve, and go and make it happen. And that is together with men walking along, because what we're very good at is women talking to women about women's issues, rather than bringing women and men together to make it happen.
A very, very powerful closing statement there, and heartily agreed, Carl. Thank you. Thank you. Your passion is always so refreshing. Jean-Pierre?
Yes, I mean, I agree with Colleen, and you know, I think it's two different things: setting up targets that you want to achieve, and on the other hand, forcing you know, some kind of parity or balance at board level. I've witnessed, I mean, over the last 10 years or so, speaking to French chairmen or CEOs, and very often I heard the phrase, well, she's on the board because we have to respect that quota. I think there's nothing worse than that. But giving ourselves targets doesn't forbid us from making absolutely sure that the talent is there and the quality is there. This is, of course, the priority, and we won't budge on that. So I think there's a different approach. And what I believe can really change, I mean, of course, we talked about many actions that can really make women at large progress and reach higher level within the organization. But I think we need to talk to the men, and we need to talk to the boards. We need to talk to the chairmen. We need to talk to the nomination chairmen, of these committees, and really get them trained. And open up. It's all about communication, opening up the mind, thinking differently from the past, and making people realize that if we think like the past, then we're going to fail.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Ala, closing comments from you, please.
Well, I attended the first session last week, and I wrote something on the chat. So I made a kind of a promise that we will cover something next week. And today I need to fulfill that promise. Some of the panelists last week talked about when you join as a woman, when you join a board, you have to make yourself heard. You have to speak out and show that you can contribute. And I felt a little bit taken by this point, and I wanted to comment on it because I see it differently. I see that women, when they join, they should be not one of the boys. I wouldn't say exactly like that, but they should act like one of the 7 or 8 or 10 board members, act wisely and act based on their competencies, not because of the fact they are women. Because if she always remind everyone else that because I'm a woman, I can speak freely about women. I can speak about my species. I will tell you how women think. Because as a man, I have a wife, mother, daughters, sisters, and I know also how women think and what's their preferences. So you can't just tell me, ignore what you know about women and just listen to me because I'm the woman in the room. And I want them to please consider another approach, which is to just play along, understand the dynamics of the board they are in. Because as we all cover this topic, we will try to lead more women into the boardroom, but then in the boardroom, they have to make themselves accepted, contributing and adding value as a collective body. Because in governance, they teach us about a collective body and you have to contribute as a whole. And then, unfortunately, sometimes they ruin this picture. When they join, they act as a single person and wants to be heard out. I think they should sometimes make a point that this is my personal opinion and I will be very strong and will advocate for it and fight. But for the rest of the times where she can just act gracefully as member of the board. And remember, if the board is 11 people, you are 1 over 11. So I wouldn't say that you are not very special, but you're just one of the other people that you need to respect everyone else. That's my closing.
Thank you very much for that, Ala. A point very well made. On that note, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to our panel members. We've been very fortunate, all the delegates, to have engaged such a diverse panel, which is representative and reflective of so many different experiences, areas of expertise, and thoughts and perspectives as well. To each of you, I'd like to personally say thank you for sharing with authenticity, with passion, and obviously a deep commitment, and your contribution is seen and appreciated. In Africa, we have a proverb that is often attributed to Madiba, that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think not just this panel, but this series is really practical evidence of that. And I think we should all be proud. Thank you so much. Dan, do I hand back to you?